There are certain episodes of the bold and the beautiful that do not simply move the story forward, but instead reach deep into the emotional core of the characters and pull everything fragile to the surface. And what unfolds on Friday, April 17th, feels exactly like that kind of turning point. The kind that does not rely on spectacle, but on something far more unsettling: the quiet destruction of trust, the slow revelation of truth, and the unbearable realization that the people we rely on most are sometimes the ones shaping our lives in ways we never consented to. And as I sit with everything that is about to happen, I cannot help but feel that this episode is less about what is revealed and more about what is lost in the process. Because once truth arrives in a situation built on manipulation, nothing remains untouched. Nothing returns to what it once was. And at the center of that emotional collapse stands Electra Forrester, a young woman who believed she understood her place in the world, believed she knew who was protecting her and who was hurting her, only to discover that those roles have been dangerously reversed in ways she never imagined. The unraveling begins with a decision that feels both inevitable and heartbreaking. The moment Daphne Walton chooses to step forward and tell the truth, and what strikes me most about Daphne in this moment is not just her courage, but her hesitation. Because she's not acting out of anger or revenge, she's acting out of a growing sense that silence has become unbearable, that carrying the knowledge of what Ivy Forrester has done is no longer something she can justify. And I have always believed that the most powerful confessions in stories like this do not come from certainty. They come from conflict, from an internal struggle between self-preservation and moral responsibility, and Daphne embodies that struggle perfectly. Having overheard fragments of conversations, having pieced together the truth slowly, reluctantly, until it became impossible to ignore, and by the time she approaches Electra, there's a quiet urgency in her that tells me she understands the weight of what she is about to do. She understands that once these words are spoken, there will be no way to contain the fallout, no way to protect anyone from the consequences, not even herself. When Daphne finally reveals what she knows, the truth does not arrive as a single, clean revelation. It comes layered, heavy with implication, each detail adding another crack to the foundation of Electra's reality. And the most devastating part of it all is not just the manipulation itself, but the intimacy of it. Because Ivy was not an outsider interfering from a distance. She was someone embedded in Electra's life, someone who had earned her trust, someone who had stood beside her during moments of vulnerability. Especially when Remy Pryce used deepfake technology to distort her identity and create a false narrative around her. And that is what makes this betrayal so profoundly personal, because it is not just about what Ivy did. It is about who she was supposed to be: a guardian, a protector, a guiding presence. And now that image begins to fracture as Daphne explains how the letter Electra wrote to Will Spencer was never delivered, how it was taken, hidden, and used as part of a carefully constructed illusion designed to convince Electra that her relationship had already reached its end. At first, Electra resists, and that resistance feels painfully real, because denial is often the first refuge when trust is threatened. The instinct to believe that there must be some misunderstanding, that the person you depended on could not possibly be capable of something so calculated. And yet the more she listens, the more the pieces begin to align, the more the past rearranges itself into something she no longer recognizes. And I can almost see her replaying every moment in her mind, every conversation with Ivy, every subtle suggestion, every quiet redirection away from Will and toward other possibilities, even toward R.J. Forrester. And suddenly those moments take on a different meaning, no longer innocent, no longer coincidental, but part of a larger pattern that had been guiding her decisions without her knowledge. And that is the kind of realization that does not just hurt, it destabilizes. It forces a person to question not only others, but themselves, their judgment, their memory, their ability to trust what they feel and what they see. And when that realization fully takes hold, it transforms into something else, something sharper, something that demands confrontation. And that is exactly where Electra goes next, because once the truth settles in, she cannot remain passive. she cannot simply absorb the pain and move on. She needs answers. She needs acknowledgement. She needs Ivy to face what she has done. And when she finally confronts her, there is no hesitation, no uncertainty, only a raw, unfiltered demand for truth. A question that carries far more weight than its simplicity suggests. Where's my letter? What did you do to my life? Why did you take something that was mine and reshape it into something else? And yet what makes this confrontation even more compelling is Ivy's response, because she does not respond with guilt in the way one might expect. She does not immediately collapse under the weight of accusation. Instead, she stands her ground, composed, resolute, and that is where the emotional conflict deepens, because Ivy does not see herself as the villain in this story. She sees herself as the one who intervened, the one who acted when no one else would, the one who made a difficult decision in order to protect Elektra from what she believes is an inevitable cycle of pain. From Ivy's perspective, Will is not simply a young man with his own identity. He is part of a legacy, a reflection of Bill Spencer and everything that name represents, the power, the recklessness, the emotional damage left in its wake. And in Ivy's mind, allowing Elektra to continue down that path would have been a failure of her responsibility. And so she justifies her actions as necessary, as protective, as something done out of love rather than control. And that is what makes this situation so painfully complex. Because while her reasoning may come from a place of concern, her methods strip Elektra of her agency, her ability to make her own choices, her right to experience love and loss on her own terms. And Elektra sees that clearly now. She feels in the anger that rises inside her. The anger not just at being deceived, but at being treated as someone who could not be trusted to live her own life. And that kind of anger does not fade easily. It lingers, it reshapes relationships. It creates a distance that cannot be bridged by explanation alone. Meanwhile, another thread of tension unfolds in parallel, one that has been building quietly beneath the surface and now begins to reveal its deeper roots. And that is the conflict between RJ and Will, a rivalry that at first glance appears to be centered around Elektra, but quickly reveals itself to be something much more complicated, something that has been simmering long before she entered the picture. And as Ridge Forrester pushes back against RJ's attempt to influence decisions at Forrester Creations, reminding him that authority lies with him and Steffi Forrester, it becomes clear that RJ's actions are not just about concern. They're about control, about asserting himself in a situation where he feels threatened, and when Ridge and Brooke Forrester later confront their son, asking him to explain his hostility toward Will, the answer that begins to emerge is not simple. It is layered, rooted in something deeper than recent events, something tied to identity, to legacy, to the shadow cast by powerful figures like Bill Spencer. And perhaps even to a personal history that RJ has never fully resolved. RJ's hatred, then, is not just about protecting Elektra. It is about confronting something within himself, something that will represent whether it is rivalry, insecurity, or a deeper emotional wound that has never been addressed. And that makes his position even more complicated. Because while he may genuinely care about Elektra, his actions are influenced by something that goes beyond her, something that shapes the way he sees Will and the role he believes Will should or should not play in their lives. And that internal conflict adds another layer of tension to an already volatile situation. Because now Elektra is not only dealing with the betrayal of Ivy and the uncertainty of her feelings for Will, she is also caught in the middle of a conflict that has its own history, its own motivations, its own consequences. As everything converges, Elektra finds herself facing a choice that feels almost impossible, because it is not just about deciding who she wants to be with. It is about deciding what she believes, what she values, what she is willing to forgive, and what she cannot accept. And that kind of choice does not come easily, especially when it is rooted in pain, in betrayal, in the realization that love itself has been manipulated. And I find myself wondering what it means for her moving forward. Whether she will be able to separate her feelings for Will from the circumstances that drove them apart. Whether she will be able to see RJ clearly despite the complexity of his motivations, and whether she will ever be able to look at Ivy the same way again, knowing what she now knows. Knowing that the person who claimed to protect her was also the one who reshaped her life without her consent. And perhaps that is the most haunting aspect of this entire storyline. The idea that protection, when taken too far, becomes control, and control, when hidden behind love, becomes betrayal. And as these characters move forward, carrying the weight of these revelations, I cannot help but feel that what lies ahead will not be about restoring what was lost, but about redefining what remains, about finding a way to move forward in a world where the truth has changed everything, and where every relationship must now be rebuilt on a foundation that is no longer certain, no longer secure, but perhaps, in its own fragile way, more honest than it has ever been before. There is something especially dangerous about a character like Remy Pryce returning to the bold and the beautiful at the exact moment when everyone around him wants to believe that the worst is already behind them. In soaps like this, true danger rarely arrives wearing the face of a stranger. It returns wearing memory, regret, unfinished desire, and the soft voice of someone who insists he has changed. That is what makes the latest confirmation about Remy's long-term return so fascinating and so unsettling at the same time. The news that Christian Weissman has signed a contract and will remain with the CBS daytime drama does more than guarantee more screen time for one troubled man. It signals that Remy is no longer just a temporary disruption or a cautionary detour in someone else's story. He is becoming part of the architecture of the show itself. And that means the writers are not bringing him back simply to revisit old wounds with Deke or stir up one more burst of short-lived trouble. They are preparing to place him at the center of something much more complicated, much more intimate, and much more destructive. The most revealing part of Weissman's interview is not only that Remy's return will create trouble, because a man like Remy was always going to create trouble. The truly explosive part is that he is said to have an unexpected connection to someone already woven into the fabric of the bold and the beautiful. And once that detail enters the story, every glance, every past encounter, every seemingly random act of sympathy or hostility begins to take on a darker and more deliberate meaning. What makes this development so compelling is that Remy has never functioned as a simple villain in the traditional sense. He is not purely monstrous, not purely cold, and not purely strategic. He is impulsive, obsessive, emotionally volatile, and at times disturbingly sincere. That combination is what makes him so difficult to predict and so difficult to contain. A character who enjoys cruelty for cruelty's sake can usually be identified early and resisted. A character who believes his feelings justify his behavior is far more dangerous, because he experiences himself not as a threat, but as a wounded man reaching for what should have been his. That is the energy Remy brings into every room. He does not walk back into Los Angeles like someone who wants revenge in the straightforward sense. He walks back like a man who is still in conversation with his own past, still clinging to the belief that love, if it were only given enough time and enough forgiveness, could redeem everything he has done. That belief is exactly what makes him frightening. When someone has convinced himself that emotion excuses manipulation, the line between tenderness and terror becomes terribly thin. So when Remy appears at Il Giardino, talking about how much he misses Deke, how much he still loves him, how deeply he misses the life they had, the scene is not merely romantic or nostalgic. It is haunted. It carries with it the uneasy sense that Remy is trying to step back into a life that may no longer exist, and he is doing so with the stubborn hope of a man who has not fully accepted the consequences of his own past behavior. Deke's hesitation in those scenes matters just as much as Remy's longing. It would be easy to reduce the situation to a simple question of whether Deke still has feelings for the man who hurt him, but that would flatten the emotional complexity of what is really happening. Deke's uncertainty speaks to something deeper than lingering affection. It reflects the human weakness that soaps understand so well. People do not always stop loving someone just because that person has become dangerous or unstable. Sometimes the most painful relationships are the hardest to sever because they contain real intimacy, real history, and real moments of tenderness that refuse to disappear just because uglier truths came later. Deke does not seem blind to what Remy has done. He does not seem eager to erase the past. Yet he also cannot fully harden himself against the memory of the life they once shared. When he admits to Remy that he has just told Dylan that love can overcome obstacles, the line lands like a confession he was not prepared to make. It reveals that some part of him still wants to believe in emotional rescue, still wants to believe that broken things can be repaired if the feeling is strong enough. Remy seizes on that immediately, because for a man like him, hope is not just comforting, it is ammunition. The moment he takes Deke's hand and asks him, in effect, whether he truly believes that love can endure, he is not merely expressing vulnerability. He is testing the door, feeling for the weakness in the lock, searching for the exact emotional argument that might let him back inside Deke's life. But the show makes it clear that Deke is not Remy's only reason for returning, and that is where the story becomes truly electric. According to Weissman, Remy is tied to another character in a way that is surprising, complicated, and ultimately logical once the truth is exposed. That promise transforms Remy from a romantic complication into a narrative bomb waiting to detonate. Because the moment a supposedly isolated troublemaker turns out to be linked by blood, by secret history, or by hidden identity to someone central on the canvas, every storyline near him becomes unstable. Suddenly his presence threatens not just one relationship, but multiple families, multiple loyalties, and the emotional logic of the entire show. The phrase that this connection will make sense because Remy and the mystery person have many similarities is especially revealing. It suggests the link is not random. It suggests a bond rooted in personality, instinct, behavioral patterns, or inherited impulses. In other words, the story is likely to be less about surprise for the sake of surprise and more about the chilling realization that certain traits do not emerge in isolation. They belong to a lineage. They come from somewhere. And once that somewhere is named, the consequences will radiate outward. One of the most tantalizing possibilities is the idea that Remy may be connected to Sheila Carter, and it is easy to understand why this theory has such powerful dramatic appeal. On a surface level, Sheila and Remy already share the kind of emotional makeup that would make a family connection feel believable. Both are capable of intense fixation. Both are defined by the tension between wanting love and using manipulation to secure it. Both have histories that blur the line between desperate need and deliberate wrongdoing. More importantly, Sheila has already shown an unusual softness toward Remy. In a world where most people recoil from him, fear him, or condemn him, Sheila did not seem to respond with disgust. Instead, she offered him something close to recognition. That is not a small detail in a soap. Characters like Sheila do not extend grace casually. If she saw something of herself in Remy, that alone would be enough to plant the seed of suspicion. If, however, she did more than merely recognize him, if she somehow knew more than she let on, the entire emotional meaning of those early interactions changes. The detail about Sheila helping Remy get maintenance work with Bill Spencer, even encouraging him to use a false name, becomes especially loaded under that interpretation. On the surface, one could dismiss it as Sheila doing what Sheila often does, meddling, improvising, helping a chaotic outsider move around in secret, because she has always had a weakness for hidden games and dangerous people. But if Remy were family, especially the son of one of Sheila's lesser-known children, then her involvement would no longer seem casual. It would feel protective. It would feel almost maternal in a sideways, covert Sheila-like fashion. Sheila has never been a conventional nurturer. When she protects someone, she usually does it through schemes, manipulation, and strategic concealment. Helping Remy establish himself under an alias would fit that pattern perfectly. It would mean she was not simply aiding a troubled young man. She was positioning her own blood, helping him slip into the world, letting him observe, influence, and perhaps even claim a place in a family system that had no idea he existed. The theory that Remy could be the son of Diana Carter is especially rich because it creates a bridge not only to Sheila, but also to the Marone-Forster web, which is exactly the kind of legacy Chaos, the Bold, and the Beautiful loves to revive. If Diana is Massimo Marone's daughter and Remy is Diana's son, then Remy is not just some emotionally unstable outsider who once tormented Elektra. He becomes a figure with blood ties to one of the show's most historically tangled dynasties. That would instantly shift his status from intruder to buried heir. It would make him kin to Ridge on a half-bloodline, and by extension tangle him with RJ, Steffi, and the larger Forster clan in a way that is almost too deliciously messy for a soap to resist. More importantly, such a revelation would not just matter on paper. It would strike at the show's emotional core, because families on this canvas do not simply share genes. They share power, entitlement, trauma, vanity, and long-standing ideas about who belongs and who does not. Remy discovering that he belongs to that world, even in a compromised or contested way, would transform his psychology. A man who already feels denied, judged, and pushed out could become far more volatile if he suddenly believed that Los Angeles owed him not pity, but recognition. The emotional fallout for Elektra would be enormous in that version of the story. Elektra has already suffered through the violation of Remy's fixation and the use of fake images that distorted her reality and threatened her sense of safety. If the same man who terrorized her turned out to have a direct family link to the Forresters, the injury would deepen from personal victimization into institutional contamination. The danger would no longer feel external. It would feel embedded within the very family structure that was supposed to protect her. That is the kind of twist that can shatter a character's emotional confidence for a long time. It would also place Steffi and Ridge in impossible territory. They already have every reason to despise Remy based on what he did to Elektra. But bloodlines complicate hatred in a soap world. Suddenly rejection becomes a family decision. Suddenly outrage has to coexist with the uncomfortable possibility that Remy's darkness may be coming from somewhere within their own extended lineage. That kind of discomfort is catnip for the genre, because it forces characters to confront the difference between condemning a stranger and disowning one of their own. And yet, while the Sheila Diana route is dramatically seductive, it is not the only plausible possibility. The theory that Remy could be Bill Spencer's secret son offers a different kind of turmoil, one rooted less in Gothic family revelation and more in masculine legacy, power, and inherited appetite. Bill has spent years as one of the show's most magnetic embodiments of ruthless male force, a man whose intelligence, ambition, sexuality, and ego have shaped generations of conflict. Remy shares some of that energy, though in a more damaged